out the window. So I went to the laundry window where I could see better, and there outside the window was my husband, and he was making growling, scratching noises on the window. So he'd started to torment my son. And also another time I saw him standing in the hallway looking into the lounge room as I was preparing tea in horror, and I quickly looked around the corner and I noticed my husband pulling very ugly faces at him, and he just laughed it off when I spoke to him about it. So he'd started to torment, but he was still being quite physical with me, and I still hadn't come to that place where I felt it necessary to do anything about it. I just thought that if I tried harder, if I lost weight, if I was a better wife, if I looked nicer, that things would be better. Well, they weren't. I had started to go back to the family church, and we used to meet on a Sunday afternoon. And when I came home one night, he wasn't home, and I came in the door, and not long after he returned. He didn't have a driver's license. I was the driver, as I'd found out one time, because he'd actually picked me up and thrown me in the driver's seat when he saw a police car pass us. So that was the first I'd known that he didn't have a license. He was driving without a license. So anyway, this particular night he came home and he demanded that we go to his mother's house. He needed more alcohol, and as it was, I saw he was in quite a psychotic state. I'd also found prescription drugs on him, so he was mixing the two, mixing the alcohol and the prescription drugs. I'd several times had a go at him over dropping them on the floor. I was terrified my son was going to pick one up and think it was a lolly. But he just kept on and on to me. I'd sat down and I was feeding the baby a bottle, and he snapped and he started punching me and pulling my hair, spitting at me, calling me all things under the sun. This was in front of my son, and while I was holding the baby. He picked my 3-year-old son up and threw him into a wall, and I thought that we were going to be dead that day. This tirade of violence went on for about 4 hours non-stop. Even though I was screaming, nobody came to my aid. It was still at that time when your neighbours didn't want to get involved. Eventually, he said, I need more alcohol. He threw me into the car and he got behind the wheel, and he was drunk and doped out on his medication, and he was all over the road, and I thought perhaps I might die in a car accident then as well. But as it was, he made it to his mother's place. His mother lived in a commission flat upstairs. So as soon as he got out of the car and was up those stairs, I was at the wheel and I took off. I went to my parents for help, and at that time I was bleeding all over. I was bloodied and bruised. I had big clumps of hair out of my head. And from that minute on, I decided he'd touch my son. He would never touch my son again, and I left him. I waited until he went to work one day, and I moved the rest of my things out. And that's when the stalking started. He stalked me every day. He quit his job so he could stalk me. I was at my parents' at the time. He would ring up several times at night. In those days, you didn't have a mobile phone. He would ring up several times of day and night. He would be screaming abuse. He would be coming around, belting on the door, pretending to be somebody he wasn't, just so that we would open the door. At times he did get in and he would run straight into the kitchen, grab a knife, have it at my throat. I several times went to the police. I'd got an AVO on him, but as it was, it had been a federal one. So once again, I had to wait till Monday morning to report any physical action that he'd taken out. So this went on for a few years, and he continued to stalk me. Not only stalk me, he stalked my family. He went to my aunties and cousins' houses and would stalk them. Quite often you wouldn't see him, you would smell him. He wore very strong aftershave and smoked, and in the morning you would go out, you would find piles of cigarette butts and ouzo bottles around. We would always have to drive in with full beam lights just to scour the yard to make sure he wasn't hanging around. It didn't matter where I went, he followed me, he tried to run me off the road. At that time I was working, I ended up getting a part-time job at a hospital. He went into my place of work and threatened them with a gun that they had to get me out. He wanted to take me as a captive. At the same time, he'd been in the car park, he'd slashed everybody's tyres, and even though I went to the police time and time again, nothing seemed to be done. They got to know him by name, but it was like as though he'd led a charmed life. He just got away with it all. So after putting up with this for about 4 years, I decided I wanted to go away, think about it. I was thinking maybe if I got a divorce, because during this time I always hoped, well, maybe he will change, maybe eventually we'll get back together. That was my Christian belief, that I shouldn't divorce him. But during this time he just was getting worse and worse and worse, and I decided perhaps if I divorced him it might be the conclusion that he needed, that it was over and he would stop his stalking. So somehow or other he tended to get word of what I was doing and where I was, because I decided I would take the children away for a weekend just on an animal farm and really gather my thoughts together and decide whether this was the right thing to do to divorce him. Oh, and during this time when I'd left him, which I failed to say before, I found out I was pregnant again, which I was horrified about. And because I was pregnant after I'd left him, he didn't ever believe that it was his child. So therefore he was very possessive and jealous. He also broke into my bungalow that I was staying in at the back of my parents' place, and tried to belt me up because he believed that I was seeing somebody else because I was his possession. Anyway, he got wind that we were going away this particular week, and I was woken up during the night by banging in the house, and my mother ran down the stairs to where I was staying in the bungalow, and she said that he was out there on the warpath. Well, apparently he had got into the house and he'd had a big fight with my brother, mother and father. And when I walked up into the house, there was water everywhere. The kitchen was turned upside down. They'd had one big hell of a brawl up there. I thought even after this time, we even had injuries there. We had assault charges. I thought perhaps we could do something about getting him committed. He just wasn't acting rational at all. And once again, nothing could be done. So I did still go away on that week. It wasn't as pleasant as what it would have been, but I made the decision, I think after that night, that it was time to divorce him. So I went through with the divorce proceedings, but we were made to go to counselling because of the children. He brought witnesses up saying that I was an unfit mother. He had friends lie on the stand saying that I was prostituting myself. He did everything he could to try and get the children off me just to hurt me. My main argument was that I didn't want him alone with the children. He couldn't be trusted while he had the substance in his system, the drugs and the alcohol, and I was really concerned about him hurting the children again. And particularly now, he didn't believe that my daughter, which I'd had, was his. He believed that she was somebody else's. So we had this confidential counselling, and eventually the time came up and they decided, yes, he did need supervision. They did allow him a weekend every couple of weeks under supervision to have the children. During that confidential counselling before the divorce, we went in. It wasn't to be reported back to the court what happened in that session because it was confidential. He said to the counsellor and went on for 20 minutes about how I had not tried in the marriage. Everything was my fault. He went on and on and on. When it was my fault, when it was my turn, I said to the counsellor, all I wanted was to make sure that he had supervision with the children because of his substance abuse. And with that, he exploded and he picked up a marble ashtray that was there and tried to hit me over the head with it and took off. Well, the counsellor said in her whole 20 years of service she'd never seen anything like it and never seen the eyes on him that he had. He always used to go black in his eyes. Sometimes he would froth at the mouth. It was like as though he was possessed because of his addictions and the uncontrollable state that he used to get himself into. So she said that she would go to the magistrate privately, and when I went into that court case, it was ruled that I would have an AVO of estate order, which was one of the very first that came out. They agreed that I was in danger from him and I was given a police escort home. Not that that ever stopped him. He continued to stalk me for another year until he was actually in a fight and he got stabbed and killed. I believe he would still be stalking me to this day if he had not have got killed. But what I want to say today is that I have learnt many things. It was a terrifying and terrible ordeal to go through all those years with having to cope with stalking from a narcissist husband and the abuse and violence and emotional torment. But what I need to say is the things that I have learned out of it is this: no matter what happens, you can never ever change a person. Don't ever believe that you are good enough or able to change another person. You can't, and you don't have that right to. They have their own life to live. You have yours. In my opinion, if I had have done it all over again, what I would suggest is move. Don't allow yourself to be in a position where you can be found and stalked the way I was stalked.